Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this very special interview today with Sue Scott, who is, you won't have seen her, she's not a media personality or anything like that. She's just a normal everyday person, but she is a veteran air traffic controller. She's an investigator. So we're going to be talking today and trying to get down to the DC plane crash and a lot of the things that happen with that. So I want to just give a quick overview of Sue because it's, it speaks for itself. Joined the Royal Air Force in 1983 as an assistant air traffic controller. 10 years later, in 1993, joined NATS. So this was formerly the National Air Traffic Services. Then it just goes on and on, this resume, as you can imagine. Qualified in tower and approach radar. 2004, she was made manager of safety for NATS airports. She was head of safety investigation for all 16 airports. 2009, she joined the German National Air Traffic Service Provider, DFS, as an instructor course manager at the German Air Traffic Control Academy. And the list does go on and on, but I don't want to embarrass her with the entire resume or CV here. But Sue, I wanted to bring you on. I know you don't normally do media or anything like that, and people will appreciate that. So don't worry here. But I wanted to get your thought as a sort of expert, not just on air traffic control, but also crash investigation, because there's a lot of questions about this DC plane crash. And I mean, we'll just focus on this one because you've probably seen there hasn't just been one plane crash. There's been a number of incidents, and they're all in a very short space of time. I don't think the media is really talking about this very much, not picking up on it heavily. But I wanted to ask you for your thoughts on this plane crash. You're open to say whatever you want here, so go ahead.
Hi, Neil. Well, thanks for asking me to do the interview. Yes, I'm a little bit nervous. I hope I can bring something of value to the discussion. You mentioned that there's been a spate of incidents, and I'd like not to focus too much on that, because when it comes to any kind of accident, incident, what you need to do, as an industry, what is the paramount, is that we identify not just what happened, but why it happened. Because usually discovering what happened, i.e. in this case 2 aircraft hit, is relatively simple. And what the NTSB, the investigating team, will be looking at is what was it that made that accident more likely to happen. So that's not just as simple as deciding or determining who's to blame. In fact, they will be doing quite the opposite, because that is not helpful. There's a lot of discussion about human error, about pilot error, air traffic control error. Did they make a mistake? Possibly, but it's also just saying, for instance, person A made a mistake, ergo that's the cause, problem solved. That doesn't help anything if the reason that person made the error or mistake was because of something within the environment that basically set them up to fail. So when I talk about the environment, you're looking at, the physical environment, the geography, the airport layout, that kind of thing. You're also looking at the technical side of things. What equipment is available? Is it serviceable? Again, going back to physical environment, that could also be time of day, weather. Are there any special conditions there? And then there's the human side of it as well, which is the training, the teamwork, the setup, the staff availability, and also what's very important is procedures that within both the air crews and the operational air traffic control staff are working, and the layout of the airspace. So you have to look at all that, because if there is some weakness within that environment, that is making it harder for the human operatives to work successfully. Then just identifying somebody made a mistake, give them a kick, is
Mm,
not
mm,
going to solve anything, and it will cause more damage because you're not preventing the possibility of a future accident.
mm,
And that's why accident and incident investigation is so important. And the key objective of an investigation is to identify the cause with the aim of strengthening future safety management,
yeah.
and not, and this is very important, not to apportion blame. That's really important. And I really feel at the moment, for everybody who's been involved in this, there's the people, including, including the pilots of both aircraft, and the passengers who actually lost their lives. But also
Mm,
there's the people within the control tower. And there's been a lot of speculation around, all of these people, which is not helpful. But the people in the control tower the other night, they have suffered also a highly traumatic event. And
mm,
that is going to be very, very difficult to deal with for all of them. So there was 5 people in the control tower. That's been confirmed by the NTSB, the National Transport and Safety Board within the USA, that they got to take responsibility for investigation. So maybe we'll come on to that a little bit later. But it's a very
yeah.
difficult thing. The controller involved himself, he won't be working at the moment, and he will be involved in the investigation. And so there's yeah, that's the first thought, is thinking about the
Yeah.
human element of what's happened.
Okay, so I got a question on that then, because this
Okay.
is news to me, and we did a pretty detailed investigation into this, as we always do, and
I know you do.
every one of these mainstream media outlets, as well as other reports, said there was one person in that tower. It was only actually when they released the audios you heard there was a man talking, but then you heard it sound like a woman gasped when the incident took place. So there was obviously, we know there was 2 people, right? But all the reports said there was supposed to be one for helicopters and one for planes, an air traffic controller, one for helicopter, and all the reports said that there was only one. Now immediately they said it was due to staff shortages, which we'll talk about because I want to ask you about that.
Yeah.
There's not enough air traffic controllers, etc. Then those other reports said they were all fired during COVID for jabs and all this other stuff. So there was all these different reports, but then there was one that the latest said there was only they're still saying there was only one person in there because the other person went home early. So you're saying now that's not the case, and there were 5 people in there. So I think probably the first question people will have, because this will be the first time they're hearing this, is where did you get that information?
I got that from the NTSB formal briefing, press briefing, and I would recommend anybody to, in the first instance, the NTSB are highly professional. They are conducting the investigation, and they will be giving the information that they're able to release, accurate information as it comes to mind. So basically, there is the NTSB Gov YouTube channel. You can see their
Mm.
full press briefings on there. So the briefing of which I'm talking about, where they confirmed staff numbers, that was just under 2 days ago. Also, there's some very good YouTube channels out there that do also republish these briefings. And one of the ones I'd recommend is VAS Aviation, VAS, Victor Alpha Sierra Aviation.
Mm.
And he also does some good recreations as well. That's worth looking at. So that is
Okay.
formal NTSB information.
Okay, great, great. Now, as you're talking, another thought popped into my head around that, and that is that could there be 5 people in? Because I don't know anything about air traffic control, right? That's why you're here. Could there have been 5 people in that tower, but only one of them was an ATC and the other 4 were some sort of supporting roles or something? Is that, I mean, how does it work? Because most people will be thinking the same as me. We have no idea what goes on in that tower.
Okay, so I'll try and simplify this. Every air traffic control facility, unit, whatever, we use different terms in different parts of the world, but every air traffic control facility is organized differently according to the task, the airspace, the type of operation that they have. So some operations require more staff, obviously, some require less. Um, I've been looking. I don't know a great deal about Ronald Reagan Airport. However, having looked at some of the recreations over the past few days, what I can see is that it is a very complex operation. So it's busy
Mm,
and it's complex. The people working are doing a very complex, difficult job, and they're doing it quite well.
mm,
Actually, there are I can see issues within their airspace that will make and the way their airspace operates that will make their job more difficult. So what you do when you with any form of airspace, whether it's upper level airspace or whether it's within an airport or around an airport,
mm,
you have to divide up the task, because to have a single person sat there doing every single task. So if you think at an airport, you might have one runway, you might have five runways. And so the jobs that are required, you need aircraft are cleared for takeoff, for landing. If you have multiple crossing runways, that increases the complexity, because you need to make sure that they integrate it, that they're not meeting on the runway, for instance. You
mm.
also have to deal with vehicular traffic, and there's lots of
Uh,
vehicles on an airport.
yeah.
So you're talking to fire vehicles, you're talking to operations vehicles, you're talking to maintenance vehicles. There's lots of stuff going on an airport. It is a busy environment. Now, at most of the sort of medium to busier airports, the task is broken down to the tower controller and the ground movement controller. We also have radar controllers, which may or may not be at the same facility. More and more often, approach radar controllers are taken out of towers, airports, and put in centrally located facilities. Whether that's a good idea or not, that's a matter of debate, but that
Mm,
is
mm.
the case. So basically, the wider team is also the approach radar controllers, which in this case are located in a separate building. So there's a lot of controllers dividing up their airspace and each working on their own tasks, but in coordination and in a team with the other controllers. So in the control tower at Ronald Reagan, as I understand it, they have the tower controller, his primary, and this is the one you've been hearing on the playbacks, the one who's
Yeah.
controlling both the Black Hawk and the arriving traffic and the departures. And he is responsible for the movements on the runway, basically integrating the runway movements and any traffic in the immediate vicinity of the airfield. He also has a ground movement controller, and the ground movement controller will be dealing with aircraft taxiing. So once an aircraft has landed and vacated the runway, he then has to be given a safe route to whatever parking stand they're going to, and there can be a
Mm,
lot of congestion on on the on the surface. Take
mm.
Heathrow, for instance, they actually have three ground movement controllers at their busiest times,
Wow.
because it is such a complex operation there. But all of those controllers are working in a very integrated way, and communicating with each other. So Ronald Reagan, they had on duty at the time, they had the tower controller and they had the ground movement controller. They will both be fully qualified air traffic controllers. They also had an assistant who will not be a controller. The assistant will be providing ancillary support. There's lots of other tasks that go on within the tower environment. The controllers do need support, and that's what the assistant will be doing. They're an invaluable part of the team. There
Mm,
was also a tower supervisor. Now, I don't know what the qualification requirements are at that particular airport. I would guess the tower supervisor is probably also a current air traffic controller. That's
mm,
conjecture. Probably might not be the case.
mm,
And the supervisor is there at the back, basically to monitor the whole of the operation and to be able to provide support where needed. So if
mm,
there's any deficiency, if there's any occurrences, if there's any support needed with extra phone calls, that kind of thing, and any coordination between the tower, radar, etc., in unusual circumstances. So the tower supervisor said it's a wide range of tasks. That person was also in the tower. With the tower supervisor was a trainee tower supervisor. I am guessing again, without knowing specifically what the staffing schedule is at this airport, The
Hmm.
trainee would probably also be a qualified controller who is training up for the supervisor position under the guidance of the tower controller. Now, they talk about somebody going home. I don't know the specific roles. It is highly likely, and information I've been getting from elsewhere indicates that is another position available in the tower, and that is a position that deals specifically with the helicopter routes within the vicinity.
Ah.
Again, this is conjecture.
Mm.
It's highly likely. I've seen similar operations occurred at Heathrow as well, dealing with um, what they call special VFR helicopters within the
Yeah.
vicinity. It's to take off the workload. Important thing is they still need to coordinate with the tower controller, because even though they're on different radio frequencies, they are sharing the same airspace. So that there is still a lot of complexity, and all of these controllers will be talking to each other. Now,
Wow. This already sounds really complicated. I'm just sort of visualizing all of this and going, wow, that's a complex setup right there.
well, it is complex. Wherever you go, really, to different ways, and according to the traffic levels. Now, the reports that I've been hearing, which are similar, I think, to the ones that you've been hearing, is that a controller was allowed to go home. Now, that sounds alarming, and also,
Mm.
so people jump quite often from one went home early, he's off on a
Mm.
jolly. That's what people think. Might not, it's probably not the case. Therefore, they were understaffed. Therefore, the controller was overloaded. Therefore, the crash
Right.
happened and it's his fault.
Right.
That does not necessarily follow. So, the way that we organise our working operational positions, sometimes you need to make tactical decisions throughout the day to manage the resources you have. And it is beyond doubt, and I suspect the situation is the same at Reagan Airport. There is a shortage of controllers. So you have your optimum, your ideal staffing schedule for each facility. I don't think I've ever seen a single one that is fully meets the required complement. So you have to work around that. And that means, okay, for instance, one scenario, I'm not saying this is the scenario.
Mm.
One
Mm.
scenario is, okay, if we can release that person, they can get away and maybe come in earlier the next day.
Yeah.
That's an example. Or it could be that so and so is feeling sick. There's something, so basically, what will then happen is they will make a little risk assessment, it's effectively what it is, and you'll assess the traffic levels and the conditions at the time. So that would include the weather, the volume of traffic, and you
Yeah.
also know what your expected volume of traffic is. At that time of night, maybe during the day, those helicopter routes, and there are a few of them around the airport there, and
Mm.
they will add a lot of complexity. There might be much more helicopter traffic on those routes, which would actually mean, yes, you do need somebody in that position. It is possible that they've looked at the schedule, they've thought, okay, yeah, traffic levels are manageable. I mean, I'm looking at that and I'm thinking that is busy. This guy is working.
Yeah.
However,
Yeah.
it's relative to what he is used to doing, what the normal traffic levels are. And if that controller feels, yeah, I can handle this traffic, I can manage the helicopter as well, then that it's possible that that's one of the reasons that the other position was sent home. So how many
Okay.
positions they normally have? It could be 6, it could be 7, I don't know. But combining of sectors is not unusual. It happens all over the world at
Yeah.
just about every air traffic control facility for various reasons.
Okay. Good. Well, that was great explanation. I think people are going to get a lot from this actually, because I'm getting a lot from it already. So it's raised two questions for me, just what you said. Number one is, if there's 5 people in that tower, how on earth did this occur? If there's that many people doing all this monitoring, and I get you said some are doing ground and some are doing other things, but you said there's a supervisor there as well. Is
Yes.
it, I remember when I was obviously in the military and we would have our ops room and the board on the screen. I mean, it was enormous, enormous, and I can see everything going on. I can see, to the last detail. I can see the white dots of every human that's there, right? So is it similar? Can the supervisor see all of this stuff as well? Is it just going to be the ATC, or is there going to be the supervisor watching it? Like, that's what I'm trying to get my head around. How did this happen?
Okay, so there's a few things around that. In terms of the information available to the supervisor, again, I don't know what specific setup they have in that tower. I would guess, however, that the supervisor's position is set somewhere centrally, in close proximity to all of the other control working positions. And on the supervisor's desk, he will probably have a ground movement radar set up. He'll have similar equipment to what's on the control working positions, so he can have a good idea of the traffic situation. He'll also have telephones there. He'll be talking. He'll be doing a lot of coordinating with other nearby air traffic control facilities and with airport operations as well. So he's doing a lot of stuff. Also, in this particular situation, he's going to be explaining the task to his colleague under training. But here's the thing. If you imagine the situation, when you're in the tower, when you're working as a tower controller, your job is primarily visual. Now, there's an awful lot of technology that's come in over the last few decades, which is brilliant. It really helps a lot. But primarily, your job as a tower controller is to use your Mark 1 eyeball. That's your primary equipment, and you're looking out. So you've got to look around 360 degrees, okay? And additionally, you have all of this amazing technology, which is down on the desk, which you also have to look down and monitor. No person can be looking everywhere all the time.
Got it.
So that's the issue. But I don't think there's any implication of a lack of awareness of the traffic situation in the tower at the moment.
That actually brings me on to my next question, unless you had another point you wanted to
No,
finish there.
you go. I talk too much.
Okay, so I listened to the audios back, and it was interesting that they didn't release the full audios at the start. I found that very unusual. So you didn't actually hear the full things. They were all edited, and then that made me suspicious. I don't know why that was, but maybe that will come out shortly. So that was the first thing. Now, listening to the air traffic controller, he sounded competent to me. I was listening through it. Yeah, okay, all seems reasonable and clear. But it was only afterwards, when I've started listening to pilots and other people on YouTube and some other video platforms, explaining why they felt that the commands and the directions weren't very good. Now, I wanted to get your view on this, because I'll give you a really easy example that everyone will understand. One of the pilots said, what the air traffic controller should have said was, have you got the CRJ that's at 5 o'clock to you, as opposed to, have you got the CRJ in sight? Because, there was 2 or 3 on screen. And so that was a criticism that I've seen from a couple of people now. And I wanted to ask you, do you feel the commands were efficient and accurate, or do you feel they could have been better, and that could have been something that will be found out when the investigation goes through?
Yeah. So there's the coulda, woulda, shoulda side of this as well. I understand some of the criticisms. I've heard some of the same criticisms that you've heard as well. So very, very briefly talk about separation. I'll make this very brief. So the controller, separation has a very specific meaning in ATC. So I'll just keep this very simple.
Yeah.
The controller is responsible for separating the aircraft that are approaching and departing from the airport. There are different ways and different parameters within which you can work that enable you to do that. And when you're talking about commercial IFR, instrument flight rules aircraft, those separation standards are fairly clearly defined. And we're talking about separation in maybe a minimum of 3 miles apart, depending on the airspace, 1,000 feet vertically, that kind of thing, are the 2 main standards. They can be reduced and altered in certain circumstances. So that's actually quite simple, and it gives you a big margin for error. Although 3 miles doesn't look that big on a radar screen, I can assure you. But then you've got the other traffic, and this is the traffic that is operating on the helicopter routes, and that is probably visual. I don't know for certain. I'm not totally clear on the airspace classification at Reagan. I think it might be Class Bravo, but I don't know. They can have visual flight rules aircraft, and that's what the helicopters are doing. Now, when you do it flying visual, VFR, I'll just simplify by saying VFR, visual flight rules. Basically, that enables the pilot to work at much lower levels than a controller would be able to allow an IFR aircraft. So, as you see, the helicopter routes are flying at 200 feet above the ground. Now, you're not going to do that with an IFR commercial airliner, obviously.
Right.
So the helicopters are operating on their own navigation, whereas with the IFR commercial aircraft, you're saying turn left heading, turn right heading, descend, climb, and their tracks are known for the great part. With a VFR aircraft, you're not going to be giving it headings usually at very low level, because you've got to worry about the terrain. It's the pilot that must maintain his navigation and separation from terrain. And when I say terrain, I'm including buildings, and this is in the middle of a large city.
Yeah.
So he's flying. If you look at the airspace charts there, the helicopter routes are following geographical line features. So in this case, the Potomac, he was flying south on the helicopter route 1, which is south down the Potomac. So following that line feature. And what you then do, this is where when I say it's complex airspace, because that route, in fact, all of the helicopter routes, they come very, very close to the immediate arrival and departure tracks of all of the runways at Reagan. That gives the controller the issue of how he's going to get that helicopter traffic through the considerable amount of arriving commercial traffic. So they are going to get very close. VFR traffic, if they can maintain own separation, are able to use lower separation minima than you would normally apply between commercial airliners. And this is where the pilot takes responsibility. So what the controller is doing is allowing that helicopter to fly. Now, these helicopters, they are familiar with the airspace. We're not just talking about wee day flyers who have never been anywhere near that airspace and are allowed to willy-nilly do what they want down those helicopter routes. We're talking about highly trained, highly competent military Black Hawk pilots who are flying that airspace fairly regularly. So they're flying these helicopter routes, and how you get that integrated with your commercial traffic is exactly as the controller was doing. You point out the traffic and then use your judgment to allow the pilot to take his own visual separation, because it's very, very difficult to get that traffic through the arrival and departure tracks otherwise. And this is fairly standard. It happens all over the place, not just with military Black Hawks at Washington. This is a fairly standard way of working. So you might say, for instance, can you see the CRJ in your 2 o'clock? A-firm, I see that, Roger. Arrange your flight to pass behind. The phraseology varies. It's fairly standard globally, but there are variations locally. In terms of the traffic information that this controller gave, he pointed out that CRJ in relation to the geographical position which was displayed on the chart and which would be familiar to that helicopter pilot. He gave an accurate position. Okay. And now that's not to say it couldn't have been better, but he did give an accurate position. The pilot then quite confidently confirmed that he had that traffic in sight, and that pilot requested to take his own separation. So, from the controller's point of view, he's thinking, okay, competent but good pilot here. He can see it and he's happy to take his own separation. Okay. So, from that point of view, the controller did not do anything wrong.
Mm,
You could argue he should have given traffic information also to the CRJ pilot on the helicopter. I'm not sure in this situation it would have made that much difference. But when it comes to, okay, giving traffic information, I've seen similar reports. He should have said in your 12 o'clock, in your 5 o'clock, 3 miles, etc.
mm,
I disagree with that, although that doesn't mean to say there couldn't have been a different way of giving the traffic information. At the point the CRJ was pointed out, it was about 5 miles away to the south. It's at night. It is difficult to make out, distinguish different aircraft lights, and I do think there's a potential that he's
okay.
misidentified the aircraft. But that helicopter, as I said earlier, is self-navigating. He's maneuvering along a varying line feature. His heading, his track, is varying. If you look at your radar screen and you're looking at an aircraft that is maneuvering and making some fairly, wide maneuvers within a small piece of airspace, and you say it's in your 12 o'clock, yet at the moment you say that he's looking east,
Mm,
for instance, and the traffic he
yeah.
needs to look is south, that is not helpful. So giving in this situation traffic information in terms of the o'clock position, I don't think would have been the appropriate action. What he could have
Okay.
done was, rather
Okay.
than saying over the bridge, I can't remember the name of the bridge, he could have said traffic 5 miles south of you, because south is always going to be in the same position. That is
Yeah.
another way of doing it. Whether that would have been better or worse, that is a matter for debate. I do not believe that controller gave inaccurate or incorrect traffic information. That
Okay.
does not mean to say there was no margin for error. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. Which leads me on to the next point, which, I mean, let me know if you don't want to get into this. Completely up to you. Um, and that is then if we move on to the heli, the Black Hawk. Now it's interesting you keep saying he when you're describing the helicopter. You're saying he. Is that because you normally refer to aircrafts as he, or I'm just
It's
curious.
just normal English language usage. It's just easier to use, one gender form, if you like.
Okay.
I don't really
Okay.
care whether we say he, they, or Eric, or
All right.
Frederica. It's
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
I'm just using a generic he.
Okay. Sure.
It's a
Sure.
bit more personal saying it.
Just because, and let me know if you don't want to discuss this. That's absolutely fine. But it's now being confirmed that the pilot was a woman Black Hawk pilot, and I'm not an investigator like you. I'm just a logical guy, right? I just apply common sense. I look at things. I'm a critical thinker, and you've very as we've gone through this, you've just started eliminating all sorts of things that I had in my mind. Well, that could have contributed, that could have contributed, that. And I know there's going to be a detailed investigation, so you won't want to speculate or anything like that. But we we've got a lot of information out on the pilot now that says that she had somewhere between 450 hours is what the consensus is, 450 hours, but some say 500 hours of
Yes.
experience and flight time in the last 5 years. Some reports, a lot of the media reports are saying that she'd been working at the White House as an aide, Biden aide, for the last 2 years, etc., etc. I'm not going to get into all of the DEI aspect, which is the main focus on it at the moment, because I don't really, as I said in my last video, I don't really see the relevance of that. But what I do see the relevance of are the facts and the critical aspects, which are: is 450 hours or 500 hours, is that enough experience in 5 years to be flying a Black Hawk and B on a route like that? That's my question, and I'm going to get some fierce aggressive comments on just by asking the question, because this is the world we live in now. People get really angry when you ask these sort of questions, but
Yeah.
that is the question. It's up to you if you would like to answer it, or you want to give a diplomatic answer, or whatever you'd like to do.
Okay, I can't give a definitive answer because I'm not a pilot. 500 hours, however, yeah, it's not mega high, but it is not an insignificant amount of flying hours. In terms of if that's enough to be flying a Black Hawk, well, where do you start? You need to start somewhere to get to the level of hours that you're aiming for. The other thing to bear in mind here is you mentioned the pilot, and in this case we'll say she, but there are 3 people on that helicopter. And I don't know that each of their specific roles, but there was a crew of 3, and within so I think it's slightly harsh to focus all of the attention on a single crew member, and again, I'm not apportioning blame on anybody here. What I'm saying here is it's very easy to focus in this case, I know people are focusing in on the DEI, the sex of the pilot. That is the focus of this at the moment. But there was a team, just as there are a team of 5 people in the control tower, all working together, working very closely. There's a team of people in approach radar environment. There's a team of people on the ground at the airport, the operations staff, the emergency staff, etc. And there are a team of people within each cockpit. And they have very clearly defined methodologies as to how they work together. And one of the big areas of improvement over recent decades within aviation is something called crew resource management. And that's basically the rules that govern how crews interact with each other safely and effectively within a cockpit. And again, I'm making no judgment on whether that was effective or not, because I do not know. But this is something that the investigation board will be looking at. We have something similar in air traffic control. We adapted it from CRM. We call it TRM, Team Resource Management. And it's really important. And the thing is, aviation as a whole, it is one big team game, and every single person is playing their part. If something has gone wrong within that team, if there's been some weakness, whether that procedurally or a human factor, which is an area I'm very interested in, that will come out in the investigation. Okay. The level of hours I don't know. I can't comment on whether that's sufficient or not. But I do know that was not a single person alone in that cockpit. They were operating as a team, as happens every day. Same as in the CRJ, there was a team of 2 of them in the cockpit. I will just touch on the DEI thing, because I know there's been a lot of talk about DEI, not just from the point of view of the pilots, but also from the air traffic control point of view. I'm not going to comment on, I understand the concerns that have been raised, not just within this industry. There's a whole area for debate there. What I will say is there seems to be a leap being made that because there might be specific policies in place in specific organizations, that means that a highly qualified person at the sharp end of the operation must automatically be a DEI hire and therefore potentially less competent. I do not believe that this is the case in this situation. I don't know, nor do I really have any great interest in the hiring recruitment policies or wider administrative policies of the FAA, the Federal Administration Authority, the Federal Aviation Administration. But basically, what I can tell you, even if there was some level of lowering of standards at the recruitment level, it's possible. It's possible. And if that was the case, to allow people who may not normally have got over the recruitment bar, that does not mean that at the final end you're going to have a controller who is suboptimal, because that controller then has to go through a very intense, and this is the same for the pilots, a very intense period of training, and there are regular checks throughout that training which they must pass. And I've been through this myself. I used to put students through this as well, and somebody who is not going to be capable of, in air traffic control, working that level of traffic, or as a pilot flying that aircraft, they are not going to pass. they will be chopped at some point,
Yeah.
be diverted. Either they will leave employment or be diverted into another area, another profession, or another part of the organization. So
Could
in
it,
terms of
Sue?
focusing on her,
Mm,
I
could,
think,
mm.
sorry.
No, I was going to say, could it be possible though that without your knowledge, some of the, because this is the question that I have to ask the question, could it be possible that some of the standards were lowered, or you think there's just no way it would have happened? It would be too dangerous to do it. Because if you're not hitting the targets and you're however many thousands of air traffic controllers short, and there's new policies in place, could they have said, you know what, let's just drop the standards a little bit here and let's get certain people in? And is that even again, this is one of these questions I'm going to get heat for, but I need to ask the question, is that
Yeah,
possible, or is it too dangerous?
it is a tricky question to answer. In terms of standards, we have fairly robust standards throughout aviation across the world, and the FAA, the controllers within the US and pilots, they are operating to very high standards. I know
Mm,
that. Um, Whether those standards could be reduced, anything is possible. However, I do know as an operational controller, when you are training somebody, so you go through um, the place where a drop in standards is most forgiving is at the recruitment level, as I've said. So, okay, you can drop
mm,
standards to recruitment, fine. So you get a bunch of people in. As far as I can see at the
mm,
operational end, the biggest
yeah,
pain or the biggest problem there would be the potential for wasting time training people who are not going to qualify.
yeah, yeah,
If you're training somebody in the live position, because you have to go through a period of academy college training to where you work on simulators, you learn the theory, and that's quite extensive. It varies from place to place. It can easily take, depending on where you are, a good couple of years to go from being picked up on the street to sitting, working on your own, talking to traffic. Because even when you finish the college, you then have to sit with a qualified controller. And that qualified controller is in charge of the position. You know, that you're both wearing a headset,
yeah,
and the qualified controller has the facility to step over the trainees' transmissions and
mm,
take control. When you're working in an air traffic control unit and you're training somebody, you are concerned about your own license as well. If you think somebody is a risk or not capable of doing the job, it doesn't matter what the policies are, you are not going to validate them, because you have to work next to that person. You have to trust them. You have to trust each other. Again, this is part of the team thing.
mm,
The standards, there are different types of standards. There's what's written in the book, and there are also the actual standards that you're working to. So there's a lot of conversations going on with training teams. Is this person ready for a check? Are they going to make it? And there are defined levels throughout training, at which point you have discussions, you see how it's
mm,
going. Are there
mm.
areas that need to be worked on? Is there an issue here? Does this person need some more support? Or is this basically as far as it's going to go? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's probably accurate. I would agree with you. That sounds very rational, very logical. That yeah, so what we're saying is, yeah, they probably at the recruitment level just drop the
I wouldn't
standards
say
massively.
probably. I wouldn't say probably. I would say possibly.
Okay, okay, so possibly then. I'm gonna say probably, because I think
Okay.
that'll be my word. I think they probably did, because to bring in more people that they wanted to hit with their quotas. Because this isn't a secret. It's not as if, oh, is this possible? Is it not? That we know those quotas because you can see it on the website. So we know those quotas. So how do you meet quotas? Again, let's just apply common sense. You change the recruitment aspect, you change how you recruit, you might focus on different groups of people. But is that going to affect what happens at the end result? Yeah, I think I agree with you on this. Probably not, because will people pass the test if they're not qualified to pass the test? No, unlikely. And I think it would be very dangerous. I mean, we'll
Mhm.
find out soon enough, but I think it'd be very dangerous to put people into positions where there's this level of risk. So I think we'll wait
Yeah.
for the investigation. How long do you think it will take for the investigation before we get some answers?
Okay. Now, this is going to be quite a complex investigation, but what the NTSB have said is that they aim to get a preliminary investigation report out within 30 days. So that's within 30
Okay.
days of the accident. That's fairly standard. There's a lot of work goes into an investigation. I mean, even down to, you do not underestimate how long it takes, for instance, just to do a tape transcript of the radio recordings.
Mm,
Because it's not just the radios. It's when you mentioned about recordings being released, they're not necessarily released. An awful lot of these things are picked up by people using scanners and that kind of thing. So that's why there are slightly different versions of radio and recordings available out there, which are all very useful. But the
mm.
NTSB, when they are able to, will release and report on the accurate uh, media.
Okay. Okay. So the last question I've got for you then is, why is there such a global shortage of air traffic controllers?
Ah, that's $1,000 question, isn't it? Um, yeah, this is not a new problem. This has
Okay.
been a problem. I mean, I've been in this industry 42 years. We have never really got anywhere, so it's no single country that's having this problem. We've never really got controller recruitment and training correct. And that's because I think people at various areas within an organization operating to different parameters and different understandings of an operation. What you tend to see is a boom and bust of recruitment. So quite often, I've seen this happen in the UK. I've seen it happen in in Germany, where I used to work, for instance, where you suddenly realise we've got a shortage of controllers on the shop floor. Therefore, bang, let's recruit. Let's increase tenfold, for instance, our recruitment. Okay, now you've got to train them, and training facilities are in short supply as well. But you then put through a large number of trainees through the academy level or the college level, depending on what the terminology you're using. They come out the other end, and they then, having got their shiny little provisional licenses, their trainee
Mm,
student license, it's
mm,
similar to a provisional driving license. You can get in a car and get behind the wheel, but you're not allowed to do it on your own.
mm,
And so they then go to their facility, to the unit. That might be an airport, it might be an area radar center. And then they have to get a training place, because you need to be trained in live traffic by somebody who is a qualified controller on that position, and B, also a qualified instructor. You need an extra qualification to do this. Um, and that also causes problems. If you have a shortage of controllers in position, they also need to make sure that they have time on console themselves, sufficient time to maintain their own currency. So now the rostering is trying to find a training place for somebody. You cannot have a position where every single position is staffed by a trainee. That is also not a good idea. So trying to get training places, you could have people getting to units and waiting a long time to start training. Then the entire process can take a long time. So you need to be able to assess a couple of years, 3 years or so ahead. You need to be able to forecast what your demand will be, because if
mm,
you've said, I haven't got enough, let's recruit two more, it's too late, because it's going
mm,
to be
mm.
3 years or so before you can get that person in the seat.
I
And this is
see.
what I have with boom and bust. So what happens sometimes, and I have seen this, is you put a whole load of trainees out from the college into the operation. The operation now can't cope with that many, and they basically so it's the reverse of what we were talking earlier. They're more likely to fail students earlier than they would have done before, because there's another one in the queue. Let's just get this one through. We haven't got time to waste. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Then you have so we have this boom and bust thing, which makes it difficult to get training. And then we had COVID as well, which globally a lot of control. So basically, traffic levels went down, airports closed, people were, put on furlough, laid off, suspended, whatever, and that gives you new problems, because when they come back, if they come back, a lot of them, took the opportunity to go off and do other things, take early retirement, whatever. But if you can imagine somebody who's been off work for a couple of years and then has to go back and they're at a later stage of life and it's a higher intensity, of traffic than some other
Yeah.
airports, for instance,
Yeah.
you then have to retrain. Wherever you go as a controller, because we're talking before about, you said passing the test. It's not just one test, because you also have to prove your competency throughout your career. There are regular checks, pilots and controllers all the time. So that puts pressure on the operation when you're short staffed, etc. So that has been an impact. There is no single reason why we have such a shortage. All I can say is it's not new, but at the moment, I think we're still recovering from the industry, and it's not just in air traffic control. It's even worse when it comes to airport operations, ground staff, that kind of thing, because you're talking about people who are in low-paid jobs, and they're not just going to come back, and it's difficult to recruit them and keep them.
Okay.
Airports in particular. Has that gone any way
Yeah.
towards answering what you're asking?
So what I'm hearing is the solution I think they will find to this in the very near future is artificial intelligence air traffic controllers. Do you think that will ever
Yeah,
happen?
I don't know. I'm not. I mean, the technology is already there. I mean, but how robust, reliable, and safe that is another thing altogether. I'm a
Yeah.
Mark One human. I believe that there is still a huge case for human ingenuity, human adaptability, etc. There is only so far a computer can go. So that's another conversation which I'm probably not best qualified to get into.
Sure. Sure.
What the solutions are in the future, um, it is a tricky one at the moment. But yes, we do have a global shortage of air traffic controllers, and some places are feeling that more than others. I have no doubt that Reagan also do not have their full complement of controllers, and it could also. So I put the positive case on why somebody was let go early. The other case is that they might be overstretched as well, and there is strain on the operation. Everybody's feeling this all over the world, and the smaller the operation, believe it or not, sometimes the bigger the impact, because you have less flex. And this is why when you see air traffic control delays, etc., in a lot of places, or restrictions, slot times, it's because if you are now going down to levels of staffing that are difficult to manage normally, then you have to do something about that. And if you can't magic the staff up, and I've talked about combining sectors, if the decision to combine a sector is going to increase unacceptably the level of pressure upon the controller, then you have to do something about the traffic levels. You have to reduce that. And that's where restrictions come in.
Yeah.
They're unavoidable, unfortunately.
Good. Well, I think that's really most of the questions I had. I mean, I could ask you things all day, and I think people will probably
I
get
could
in the
talk about it
comments.
all day.
Yeah, and they get in the comments, they say, Neil, you hardly asked any questions. What happened? Or, but I think I've got the key questions that I wanted to ask you complete now. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you and sharing your time, because, it's very generous of you. It's not as if you get anything from it. So everybody, please leave Sue a nice comment below, because she did just share her time with us, just to help us to understand a little more, to answer our questions around this terrible tragedy. So that's it. Thank you so much. Please subscribe to the channel if you are not already. I know Sue is a subscriber. She told me before, so that was nice. So thank you so much for being online, everybody, and thank you to Sue. So apart from that, I'll see you all next time. Take care. God bless.
Thank you.